If you've ever looked up how to roast vegetables, you've probably heard the rules. Dry them thoroughly, don't overcrowd the pan, roast them hot. I wanted to know how much those rules actually matter, because if I break one, am I really going to ruin dinner? So I tested 3 of the most common pieces of roasting advice using broccoli, cauliflower, and carrots. And I went into this expecting the answer to be pretty obvious. It wasn't. All 3 rules mattered, but they didn't matter equally, and one of them made a much bigger difference than the others. Hi, friend, come on in. Let's see what actually matters when you're roasting vegetables. To start, I'm testing the advice to dry your vegetables thoroughly. I cut the broccoli into fairly large florets and washed them. Broccoli has plenty of little nooks and crannies for bugs to hide in, so I sometimes soak the florets in salted or vinegar water first. I don't need the extra protein that badly. I divided the broccoli into 2 batches. One I dried thoroughly on a kitchen towel. If you don't have a salad spinner, this works really well. Put the broccoli in the center of the towel and spin it around, preferably outside. Otherwise, you've basically made a little broccoli sprinkler. The other batch I simply let drain in the bowl. Everything else stayed the same. Same amount of oil, same amount of salt, and both went onto sheet pans. I also skipped the silicone baking mat because I wanted the broccoli directly against the hot metal. And this is where things got interesting. Even after draining, the broccoli I hadn't dried was releasing a surprising amount of water onto my hand. That should make it harder to brown, and I expected the difference to be pretty obvious. The pan went into a 425-degree oven or 220 degrees Celsius for about 20 minutes without stirring. Next, I'm testing overcrowding. This is one of those rules you hear constantly. Don't crowd the pan. And honestly, it makes sense. If vegetables are packed together, there's less room for moisture to escape and less surface area exposed to the hot air. So I wanted to see how much difference it actually made. I cut the cauliflower into florets and trimmed off any discolored sections. For both the broccoli and cauliflower, I like cutting from the stem towards the flowers because I find I get fewer little crumbs. And don't throw away those stems. I cut them on the diagonal and eat them too. I seasoned the whole batch with the same amount of oil and salt. Then I divided it in 2. One side had plenty of space between the florets. The other was deliberately crowded. Both went into the same 425-degree oven for about 20 minutes. So now we have 2 questions. Does the wet broccoli really fail to brown? And does the crowded cauliflower really turn out badly? The third rule is probably the one you hear most often. Roast your vegetables hot. And this was the test I was most curious about. Because if higher heat really makes such a difference, I wanted to know whether that difference would actually be noticeable on the plate. For this, I'm using carrots. I cut them into diagonal chunks to give them more surface area for caramelization. Again, both batches got the same amount of oil and salt. The only thing I'm changing is temperature. One pan goes into a 350-degree oven, or 175 Celsius. The other goes into a 425-degree oven, or 120 Celsius. Everything else stays the same. For all the vegetables, I'm checking doneness by poking them with a knife. I want the knife to slide in with a little resistance. I don't want mushy vegetables, and because they're going to keep cooking on the hot pan after they come out of the oven, I actually prefer them slightly underdone at this point. And this is where the experiment surprised me. I expected limp broccoli, soggy cauliflower, and pale carrots. Instead, every tray produced vegetables I'd happily eat. The wet broccoli browned slightly less and stuck to the pan a little more, but it was nowhere near ruined. The crowded cauliflower also browned surprisingly well on the exposed surfaces. It just didn't caramelize as evenly where the florets were touching. But the biggest difference showed up with the carrots. The carrots roasted at 425 developed noticeably deeper caramelization and a sweeter flavor. And that's when the hierarchy became pretty clear. The rules mattered, they just didn't matter equally. And honestly, this was the part I found most interesting. Every tray looked good. It was only when I put them side by side that the differences became obvious. If I had roasted those carrots at 350, eaten them, and never compared them to the hotter batch, I probably would have thought they were perfectly good carrots. I wouldn't have known what I was missing. And I think that's an important distinction when we're talking about cooking advice. A cooking rule can improve your results without being a requirement for success. So if I had to prioritize these 3 rules, here's how I'd rank them. First, roast hot. That's where I saw the biggest difference, especially with the carrots. Second, give your vegetables enough room. Crowding didn't ruin the cauliflower, but it did make the browning less even. Third, dry your vegetables thoroughly. Drying definitely helped the broccoli brown and release less water, but the wet broccoli still turned out perfectly edible. So yes, the rules exist for a reason. They just aren't all or nothing rules. And that's probably the biggest thing I'm taking away from this experiment. Roasted vegetables are much more forgiving than we sometimes make them sound. Dry vegetables brown a little better. More space gives you more even caramelization. Higher heat develops deeper browning and flavor. Those things matter, but they are optimizations. They're not prerequisites for making a good dinner. Maybe my oven is more efficient than yours. Maybe this wasn't a perfectly controlled test. Maybe your vegetables, your pan, or your oven would give you a different result. That's okay, because I don't want cooking advice to make you afraid to cook. If your broccoli is still a little wet, roast it. If you crowded the pan, roast it. If you accidentally set the oven to 375 instead of 425, roast the vegetables. You're probably still going to get dinner. And you can learn the finer details as you go. If you found a cooking rule that you've stopped believing, tell me about it in the comments. And if you want more kitchen experiments that separate the rules that actually matter from the ones that just make cooking a little better, subscribe. I'll see you next time.